Good evening. This is Sunday evening before Labor Day, and it's about 7:30 p.m. Now, technically, the Native American and European Worldview discussion board is not due until 11:59 tonight, so I know some of you will be posting later. I apologize that I'm not going to read everyone's post before I make this video response, but tomorrow's a holiday, and like you I have a few plans, and I wanted to make sure to get this done. So I wanted to tell you first and foremost, congratulations on a good job on your first discussion board, those who've posted so far. In general, I'd say that it's obvious that most of you are doing the reading, and that you're reading carefully, and that you care about the topics that you're writing about. And for that, you're to be applauded. And at the same time, I'll say that really, I'm going to need most of you to be much more specific than you've been so far. I'm looking for you to go into the text and pull out quotations, examples, specific examples, and to do that several times in your posting. I would say that if you wanted to look at a post that was particularly well done, you could look at what Vanessa Sudendorf and what Shanice Morris did this week. Those to me so far, now this is as of 7:30 on Sunday evening, are the best initial thread posts and also response posts. Courtney Sturgis also was nice and specific, and I saw her try to move a conversation forward, and perhaps Catherine, but she goes by Katie, your classmate, perhaps Katie will respond to Courtney's idea that she disagreed with Katie about before the discussion forum closes. So those are the ones I would look at. I want you to also remember that I expect you to read other people's posts before you post so that material doesn't get repeated. And some material was getting repeated in this discussion board. It seemed a lot of people wanted to sort of focus on the same ideas. I really appreciated, let's see, oops, well, I think it might have been Erica, but I didn't write it down, but I think it might have been Erica who actually tried to respond to a couple of questions specifically of the choices that you were given. It seemed that almost everybody was just sort of responding to the first question there. So just keep in mind that when you participate in the discussion forums, I'm looking for you to offer new information and for as much information to get brought out as possible, for as many of the questions to be responded to and varied specific examples. One thing that you want to be careful about is stereotyping, and we sometimes tend to stereotype Native Americans as nature-loving, peaceful, and while some of that may be true, they're that and that much more. Just like all human beings, they're very complex. And so even though I posted those videos of the different versions of the Captain John Smith and Pocahontas saving him story, it was more to illustrate how different groups of people have kind of appropriated that story and Pocahontas for themselves for whatever reason to promote a certain mindset or ideal. And Disney certainly is not the best example to look at because certainly Pocahontas is nature-loving, right? The eagle flies behind her and she wants to get there in time. And if you saw the scenes before, she speaks to the grandmother tree, and it's kind of a stereotype, and it reduces a very important historical figure to a certain, like a one-dimensional kind of stereotype. And as some of you noted in the Disney version, Pocahontas is a young woman, a beautiful young woman, and Captain John Smith is blonde and handsome and young and good-looking. And in real life, he was about 30, and if you saw carvings, engravings, he wasn't that handsome. And the Pocahontas was probably 12 when the events of the story took place. So just be careful, be a critical reader, be questioning what you see and what you hear. Last thing I'd like to bring up is the rhetorical situation. A couple of you, it was Courtney and Whitney in particular, brought out the point that the European explorers are recording facts They are documenting what's happening. And you have to consider that rhetorical context. You may remember rhetorical context from English 111 or 112. That includes what's the purpose of the writing. As Courtney pointed out, in the Native American oral tradition, the purpose is to keep the stories alive and to sort of have a living history and a living sort of story about how they came to be. Whereas the particular readings of the Europeans, those were either journals or letters, and their purpose a lot of times were either to gain funding, to continue to explore. Shanice said that, Columbus was a nutcase, and we all want to sort of be careful with, the slang that we use and name calling, but the idea was that he was so focused on finding that trade route to the East Indies and so driven by that desire that probably colored the way he wrote. He did want to butter up, which I kind of prefer that to butt kissing, but he did. He wanted to appeal to King Ferdinand and Queen Isabel. No one else would fund him, and he really wanted to make it clear that, it's all for the glory of Spain, that I'm going to do this stuff if you keep on sending money. And so he did exaggerate, and Courtney, I believe, at some point, challenged Katie, that if anyone exaggerated, it was, Columbus and the explorers about what they found. Columbus didn't find the amount of gold necessarily that he said, and of course he said people had tails and things like this, and so he did exaggerate the beauty of the islands and the resources that were on the islands, and probably to make a good impression on the king and queen and to gain more funding. So again, the rhetorical situation: what is the purpose? Who is writing it? Who is the audience? And how does the writer want to be perceived? De Vaca is the one Spanish conquistador who was held captive by the natives in the area around Florida and then Texas. And he grew to appreciate and respect them and to see them as complex individuals with a culture that was worthy of respect. But his purpose in writing, some of it was to say, this is why we failed so bad. And, if you understand and respect just how tough these Native Americans are, you can see why maybe, our expedition failed and why we weren't able to conquer them. So de Vaca is trying to sort of cover, CYA, I'll use that slang, and Columbus wants to get more funding. And de Champlain was a cartographer, an explorer, an adventurer, a writer, and he wanted to sort of document what was going on there and to be part of that trade route, the fur trading. So they had different purposes, as people pointed out, with different audiences, and they themselves wanted to be portrayed a certain way, just like the Native Americans want to be portrayed a certain way in their stories, either as people who are willing to trial and error, like the one Native American creation tale, where the Doctor of the Earth did several drafts, so to speak, before he came up with the right way to have people populate the Earth. So again, let me see. I just want to double check notes. Again, I'm just looking for some more support for your ideas. They don't have to be ideas that are mine. They don't have to agree with my point of view. I don't want you to think that. But a couple of people agreed with Katie, who said that the European stories were dry. And I need you to be a little more thoughtful and deep about that. In what ways were they dry? Because I thought, the de Vaca story in particular was pretty exciting, and just all the trouble that he went through to get food and to escape and to survive the winter and to become like a physician and in their culture, and his survival story was interesting to me. And so I was kind of surprised that you thought that was dry. So you have to be more specific in explaining in what ways those stories are dry. So I think that's going to do it this week. You know, again, the rhetorical situation is something you should be thinking about as we read this literature. Who's writing it? Because we're getting ready to move into the colonial settlements and the Puritans. You know, so who's writing it? What is their purpose in writing? You know, Bradford, you were supposed to read Smith and Bradford sort of like last week moving into this week, and Bradford writes for the, you know, for the glory of God, you know, and Captain John Smith writes for the glory of Captain John Smith. And, you know, and so those are different purposes. Then they cause the writer to portray him or herself in a different way. Then the message becomes affected. And this is, you know, part of the study of literature, to think about those kinds of things as different groups of people try to develop their own voice as Americans, and as America tries to develop its own literature separate from the European tradition. This is a big deal. One more term, and that is captivity narrative. Captivity narrative. You're going to be reading Mary Rowlandson this week. That is a captivity narrative. De Bacca's story could be considered a captivity narrative. Basically, a captivity narrative is a story of an individual who is forcefully immersed into a culture different from his or her own, and has to figure out how to live within that very different culture and survive it and eventually escape it. And so De Bacca's story is one, and Mary Rowlandson's The Sovereignty and Goodness of God, which is part of what your reading is for this week, that's also a captivity narrative. And that's an important form and genre in American literature. All right, so I hope you have a great Labor Day, and I'm looking forward to the next discussion forum, which you'll do in small groups, so you won't be able to even, you won't have to worry about repeating material quite as much. So look forward to that, and have a great holiday, and I'll see you soon.